All right, ready to dive into a topic that's equal parts fascinating and relevant, even today?
I'm game if you are.
Perfect. Because today we're tackling witchcraft, and not just the surface level stuff.
We're going deep.
Deep Dive's our middle name, right?
Right.
And to get the real raw history, we're going straight to the source.
Let me guess. Wikipedia.
You know it. We've got excerpts from their witchcraft article ready to be unpacked.
Love it. Should we get this cauldron bubbling?
Let's do it. And what's remarkable is how witchcraft, as a concept, it's not confined to one time period or one place.
It's true. It pops up in cultures across the globe. And while the specifics might differ, there are these really fascinating common threads. Makes you wonder about human nature, you know?
Absolutely. And to be clear, this isn't about like pointy hats and bubbling cauldrons, though we do love those. But before we get lost in the weeds, let's define our terms. When we say witchcraft, what are we actually talking about?
Well, the common denominator, at least from what I've seen, seems to be this belief in harnessing supernatural powers.
Okay, so magic in some form, but not always with bad intentions. Yeah.
Exactly. Often, yeah, the intent was to cause harm. Think curses, hexes, that kind of thing. But it's important to remember that the hows and whys varied wildly, and not every culture saw it as inherently evil.
Right, like I'm seeing in our sources, some cultures had this idea of white magic, healers and cunning folk who are basically the magical equivalent of today's, like, handyman.
I love that analogy. Need a love potion, lost your keys, call the local magic practitioner.
Exactly. Though it does make you wonder about their Yelp reviews.
Right. 5 stars for a potent love potion, but 1 star because they couldn't find my lost cat.
My love life is amazing, but I still can't find my car keys. But jokes aside, it's interesting, because the article mentions that often those same healers would later be accused of witchcraft.
It's tragic, isn't it? Imagine being punished for helping your neighbor.
It really highlights how blurry the lines between good and bad magic could be. Like, it wasn't always about the magic itself, but about who was using it and why.
100%. And often influenced by things like social dynamics, personal rivalries, all that messy human stuff.
Context is everything. Now, another point the article makes is that where there's a belief in witchcraft, there's usually a equally strong belief in counteracting it, like a magical arms race.
Precisely. And it wasn't always about fighting fire with fire, so to speak. Some cultures turned to protective charms and rituals. Others believed in appealing to benevolent spirits or deities for protection. But sadly, many resorted to far more drastic and tragic methods for dealing with suspected witches.
Definitely a dark side to history, and one we'll unpack later on. But before we get there, let's zoom in on some specific cultures and how they viewed witchcraft.
That sounds good to me. Where are we headed first?
Well, since the article mentions examples from ancient Mesopotamia to the Cook Islands, I figure we should start at the beginning.
Ancient Mesopotamia it is. And I think people might be surprised to learn that witchcraft there was surprisingly mainstream.
Mainstream, like grabbing a magic potion with your morning coffee, mainstream.
Almost. Magic seems to have been deeply ingrained in their society, almost like an early form of science, attempting to understand and influence the world around them. They even had specific terms for different magical specialists, indicating a certain level of career path, shall we say.
So, what do you want to be when you grow up? Oh, I'm thinking of becoming a sorcerer of the royal laundry.
Right, not the most glamorous gig, but it is fascinating to think of magic as just another profession, like a baker or a blacksmith.
Just another day at the office brewing potions and banishing curses.
Exactly. But it wasn't entirely without rules. While they recognized both beneficial and harmful magic, even their ancient law code, the Code of Hammurabi, had specific punishments for using magic to harm others without proper justification.
So a bit more structured than just like picking up a spellbook on a whim.
A bit more, yes. They even developed these elaborate rituals to combat witchcraft, which really demonstrates how seriously they took it.
Interesting. So a society where magic was woven into everyday life, but also governed by laws and rituals.
Precisely. A far cry from the image we often have of witchcraft being hidden and feared, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. It really highlights how diverse these beliefs could be. Now, how about ancient China, for example? Did they have a similar outlook?
Actually, during the Han Dynasty, we see a very different approach. Emperor Wu, a staunch supporter of Confucianism, viewed shamanistic practices, which often involved communicating with spirits, as a direct threat to his authority.
Really? So witchcraft represented a challenge to the established order in this case?
Exactly, and it's a power dynamic we see echoed throughout history in various forms, often with those in charge viewing magic or those who practiced it with a wary eye.
Makes you wonder if some of that fear stems from a desire to maintain control.
It's certainly a possibility. But for a truly stark example of this, we need to shift our focus to Europe. That's where the concept of witchcraft takes a particularly dark turn.
Yeah, Europe and witchcraft. Tough to think about one without the other, right?
It's impossible to ignore that shadow, for sure.
But going through these sources, it's clear that even within Europe, witchcraft was viewed and handled, well, it wasn't all the same.
Definitely not a monolith, that's for sure. While you had beliefs in harmful magic pretty much everywhere on the continent, how intensely they went after witches, that varied a lot. And honestly, that whole widespread panic we picture with like the European witch craze, it wasn't just about religious fervor, you know?
So, not just a black and white, good versus evil kind of thing.
Hmm.
What else was going on?
It's like so much boils down to what life was like back then, the social scene, the economic realities. Think about it. Lots of these accusations, they started within communities, right? Fueled by personal grudges, people fighting over resources, or even just needing someone to blame when times got tough.
So if the harvest was bad, blame it on old Agatha and your weird tea.
You got it. When things went wrong, people wanted answers, obviously. And who better to blame than a witch with spooky powers? Never mind that it's completely unfounded. Speaking of explanations, though, we can't talk about this era without bringing up that infamous book, The Malleus Maleficarum. I mean, it's practically synonymous with this whole European witch hunt thing.
No kidding. It's like the ultimate how-to guide for witch hunting, complete with how to find them, how to interrogate them, and, of course, how to punish them. But it wasn't just some random pamphlet either, right? Didn't this thing sell like hotcakes back in the day?
Massively. I mean, we're talking, for a while there, it was second only to the Bible in terms of popularity. Published in 1486, which, when you consider what's actually in this thing, is both kind of amazing and seriously messed up.
It really does make you wonder, why this book? Why did it resonate with people so strongly? Was it just good old-fashioned fear-mongering, or was there something more to it?
Probably a combo of things. Like, on one hand, you've got the Malleus Maleficarum playing on all these anxieties people already had about heresy, about the devil. It offered a sense of order, right? In a world that probably felt super chaotic and unpredictable a lot of the time.
So is giving people someone to blame a way to make sense of the chaos?
Exactly. And to make matters worse, it reinforced all those awful stereotypes, especially about women, making them seem like they were just puppets for the devil.
Which is just, it's infuriating, really. And it gets worse because it didn't just demonize these women. It straight up told people how to persecute them.
Sadly, that's the truth. Laid out interrogation tactics, which we know often involve torture, and pushed for brutal punishments. Just awful stuff.
And its reach was pretty far, too, wasn't it? It wasn't just a few fanatics using it, right?
Not at all. You had both Catholics and Protestants using the Malleus Maleficarum. Though I do think it's worth pointing out that even the Inquisition, and they weren't exactly known for being lenient, even they had some issues with it.
Wait, so even the Inquisition thought this book went too far. That's kind of mind-blowing.
It really does make you think. But as you can imagine, despite being wildly inaccurate, even with the pushback, this book, it did some serious damage. Influenced witch hunts for centuries, sadly.
He really just shows you how dangerous it is when you take prejudice and
Right.
straight-up lies, dress them up as fact, and then give people permission to act on them.
And unfortunately, this isn't just ancient history either. The article makes it clear that witch hunts are still happening in different parts of the world.
It's true. We might like to think we've moved past this, but the sad reality is those hunts are still going on.
And often it's driven by a lot of the same things, really. Poverty, lack of education, those deep-seated beliefs that are tough to shake.
The article mentions Tanzania specifically, where every year hundreds of mostly older women are murdered because someone accused them of witchcraft. It's heartbreaking.
It really is. They're easy targets, blamed for illnesses, bad luck, anything that people can't or don't want to explain.
It's like a modern-day Salem, but even more tragic, happening in communities that are struggling with poverty, without access to health care, to education.
When your world is that challenging, it's easy to see how blaming the supernatural for your problems starts to feel like the only answer. And sadly, often, that leads to violence and even more suffering.
It's tough to hear, for sure. Just a brutal reminder that for all the progress we like to think we've made, some things just stick around. But on a more positive note, the article does mention how witchcraft, like the actual concept of it, how it's evolved, even become a source of like empowerment, spirituality for some people.
Right. It's kind of amazing, really. You go from witchcraft being this super loaded negative term to seeing it embraced by different groups, especially in modern paganism, like with Wicca.
Yeah, that Wikipedia article on Wicca was really interesting, talking about how it draws from these pre-Christian belief systems, emphasizes nature, personal growth, and, oh yeah, magic.
Totally different vibe from the witch trials, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
But it does make you think, like maybe it speaks to this very human need to feel connected to something bigger than ourselves. Find meaning in a world that doesn't always make sense.
100%. And Wicca's not the only one. You've got all these neo-pagan traditions popping up all over the globe, and many of them are reclaiming that word, witchcraft, adapting it for the modern world.
Makes you wonder if there even is one single definition of witchcraft. Or if it's just, by its very nature, fluid, always changing with the times.
That's the million-dollar question, right? And I'm not sure there's an easy answer. But maybe that's what makes witchcraft so interesting to explore. It's this lens we can look through to understand our relationship with power, belief, and the things we just can't explain.
It's definitely given us a lot to think about. So as we start to wrap up our deep dive into witchcraft, what's the one thing you hope our listeners take away from all of this?
You know, more than anything, I hope it's that witchcraft, it's complex. It's like any cultural phenomenon. It can't just be easily categorized, dismissed. It's a mix of magic, religion, social dynamics, personal beliefs, all of it tangled up together. To really understand it, you've got to look past the stereotypes and really dig into the nitty-gritty.
Perfectly said. And with that, to our listeners, we've covered a lot today. Ancient rituals to modern-day struggles. Now it's your turn. After this deep dive, has your view of witchcraft changed? Anything sparking your curiosity? What do you think this all says about us, about our fascination with the unexplained? Until next time, keep asking those questions, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.